When my gut speaks, I don't negotiate with it. I learned that lesson the hard way 40 years ago when I signed a piece of paper without reading it first. I was 26, newly married, and I trusted a smile. I've never made that mistake again. So, when my daughter called me 3 days before her wedding to tell me that her future mother in law had asked, casually, over dinner, like she was asking about the weather, whether the inheritance from my late husband's estate had already been transferred, I set down my coffee cup very slowly and said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "Sweetheart, listen to me carefully. My name is Arda Mae Calloway. I am 67 years old. I live in a house I own outright in Asheville, North Carolina, with a garden that takes up most of my free time and a cat named General who takes up the rest. I am a retired estate attorney, which matters for this story. And I raised my daughter Becca, alone from the time she was 9 years old, after her father passed from a heart attack that gave us no warning whatsoever. One Tuesday, he was eating oatmeal at the kitchen table. By Thursday, I was picking out a casket. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because it explains what happened afterward. When a woman spends 22 years building something from nothing, keeping a house, raising a child, managing a $3.4 million estate left by a man who had the foresight to plan, but not the time to explain it to anyone, she develops a very particular kind of radar. I can read a room, I can read a document, and I can absolutely read a person who is pretending not to be interested in something they are extremely interested in. My daughter is not like me in this way. Becca has her father's nature. Open, generous, quick to trust, quick to forgive. She is a third-grade teacher in Charlotte. She spends her summers reading to children at the public library. She once cried at a commercial for paper towels. I love her more than I have words for, and I have spent the better part of 30 years worrying quietly that someone would see her goodness and mistake it for weakness. When she told me she was engaged to a man named Todd, I was cautiously optimistic. Todd seemed decent enough. He worked in logistics management, remembered my birthday without being reminded, and laughed at his own mistakes, which I consider a good sign in a person. They had been together 2 years. He knew about her father. He knew about her childhood. He did not, at that point, know about the trust. That was intentional on my part, not deceptive. Becca knew everything, had always known, and the money would be hers to do with as she chose. But I had counseled enough families over the course of my career to know that certain information, shared too early or to the wrong people, has a way of changing the temperature in a room. And I had told Becca, more than once, in the gentle but serious way I reserve for things that truly matter, you don't need to hide who you are, but you don't owe anyone your financial biography on the first date, or the second, or before the vows. She had nodded. She understood, intellectually. But Becca is the kind of person who shares things. It's how she loves. I met Todd's mother, Dolores, for the first time at an engagement dinner in Charlotte. The restaurant was nice, Todd had chosen well, and Dolores arrived in a white silk blouse and a smile that I recognized immediately. I have met that smile in conference rooms. I have seen it across mediation tables. It is the smile of someone doing math in their head while appearing to be simply delighted to meet you. She was warm. She was complimentary. She asked me thoughtful questions about my career, my garden, my health. She touched my arm when she laughed. By the end of the evening, I had said nothing she could use, and I was very, very aware that she was disappointed by that, even as she embraced me at the valet stand and told me how thrilled she was to have me joining the family. On the drive home, I called Becca. "She's charming," I said. "Isn't she?" Becca said. "She sounded so happy." I said. "Has she ever asked about your father's estate?" A pause. "She asked once if Dad left us taken care of." I said yes. And she asked what taken care of meant. I was quiet for a moment. "And what did you say?" I said it meant I wasn't worried about money. Mom, she was just being friendly. "I know," I said. "I know she was. Just being friendly. I know she was. Just, let's keep it vague for now, okay? Until you know each other better." Becca agreed. I could hear the tiny note of frustration in her voice, the slight tightening that happens when she thinks I'm being overprotective. She's always found my caution slightly excessive. She has not spent 40 years in estate law. I have. The next 2 months were uneventful. The wedding planning moved forward. A small ceremony in Asheville, outdoor, the way Becca had always wanted, followed by a dinner at a historic inn nearby. I helped where I was needed and stayed out of the way where I wasn't. I liked Todd more as time went on. My concern, I began to think, might truly be just old habit. Then came the phone call 11 days before the wedding. It was Becca. Her voice was careful in the way that tells me she is trying not to upset me. Mom, Dolores called me today. Okay. She said that she had been talking to our financial advisor and that with the wedding coming up, it might be a good idea for Todd and me to, her words, consolidate our assets into something structured for the future. I waited. She mentioned a family LLC. She said some families do it for tax purposes, and she said she could have her attorney draw up some documents before the wedding so everything would be in order. I set down the gardening trowel I was holding. She wants to put documents in front of you before the wedding, I said. She said it's standard. Becca, listen to me. Does Todd know about this? A pause that lasted just a beat too long. He mentioned it too. He said it made sense. He said his mom knows a lot about this stuff. I took a breath. This is the moment I am least proud of in this whole story. Not because of what I did, but because of what I felt. I felt the cold, flat calm that comes over me in a courtroom when I realize the other side has been planning something much longer than I knew. It is not a pleasant feeling, but it is a useful one. I need you to do something for me, I said. Mom, no documents, nothing signed, not a single initial, not a checkbox, nothing. Tell Todd you want to have your own attorney review anything before the wedding. If that's a normal, reasonable request, and it is, he will say, of course. Silence. Becca, she'll think I don't trust her? You don't know her well enough to trust her. That's not an insult. That's just arithmetic. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing. I know the sound of my daughter working through something difficult, weighing her love for Todd against the voice in her head that sounds like me. Okay, she said finally. Okay, I'll tell him I want a lawyer to look it over. Good girl, I said, and don't tell them what's in the trust. Not the number, not the assets, nothing. Are we clear? We're clear. That same evening, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my former colleague, a woman I had practiced alongside for 15 years, who now ran one of the most respected estate planning firms in Charlotte. I told her the situation. She told me to send her everything I had and she would be ready. The second call was to a private investigator I had used twice during my working years. I asked him to look into Dolores quietly and tell me if there was anything I should know. He called me back in 4 days. Dolores had been involved in a civil lawsuit 9 years earlier. She and her then-husband, Todd's stepfather, since divorced, had been named in a dispute involving a family trust belonging to his elderly mother. The case had been settled out of court, the terms were sealed, but the filing was public, and the language in it was the kind of language that leaves a mark. I did not panic. I printed the document, put it in a folder, and called my attorney. I want to be very honest about something. I did not tell Becca about the lawsuit before the wedding. I have asked myself many times whether that was the right choice. People who hear this story, and I have told it a few times now, often ask why I didn't. The truth is complicated. Becca was 9 days from her wedding. She was in love. She had planned this day for months. I know my daughter. If I had shown her that document, she would not have quietly and rationally waited. She would have been shattered. She would have confronted Todd. The wedding would have either collapsed in chaos or proceeded under a cloud of accusation and counter-accusation, and I would have been the one who caused it. I was not willing to do that to her on the strength of a sealed settlement that proved nothing definitively. What I did instead was get everything into position, quietly, without announcement. I made sure the trust documentation was airtight. I reviewed the beneficiary designations, I confirmed with my attorney that under North Carolina law, an inheritance received before or during marriage, particularly one held in a properly structured trust, is considered separate property and cannot be claimed by a spouse in the event of divorce, provided it has not been commingled. Becca's trust had never been commingled. It never would be, as long as no one tricked her into signing something that said otherwise. And I waited. The wedding was beautiful. I want to say that clearly because it was. Asheville in late October is a particular kind of gorgeous. The mountains, the leaves, the light that comes in sideways and makes everything look warmer than it is. Becca wore her grandmother's pearl earrings. Todd cried when he saw her. I watched his face carefully during the vows. He meant them. I believe that. Whatever else was happening around him, I believe he meant those vows. Dolores sat across the aisle from me in a pale green dress and smiled at me exactly once. I smiled back. The dinner was lovely. I danced with my daughter. I gave a toast that made 3 tables cry, which I considered a personal achievement. I went to bed that night feeling cautiously peaceful, the way you feel when you know there is a storm coming. But the storm has not arrived yet. It arrived the next morning. I was at the inn having coffee alone. Becca and Todd were staying in the bridal suite, and I had a room down the hall when my phone rang. It was Becca. It was 7:43 in the morning. Mom. Her voice was strange, not panicked, confused. Todd's mom is here. At the inn? She's in our room. She brought a man with her, a notary, and some papers. She's saying it's just paperwork to set up the LLC, that it will only take a few minutes, that Todd already looked it over. The cold calm again. Clean and fast. Do not touch those papers, I said. I was already standing. Do not let Todd touch them. Tell them you need a few minutes. Tell them you're going to call me. You're down the hall. I know. I'm coming. But say it anyway. Give yourself the time. I dressed in approximately 90 seconds. I picked up my phone and called my attorney's cell. She answered on the second ring because I had warned her this might happen, and she is the best person I have ever worked with. It's happening, I said. Can you be here by 10? I can be there by 9:30, she said. Perfect. I walked down the hall and knocked on my daughter's door. When Dolores saw me, something shifted in her face. The warmth compressed into something smaller and more careful. The notary, a thin man in a brown jacket who looked deeply unhappy to be there, stood near the window with a manila folder. Todd was sitting on the edge of the bed looking like a man who had woken up inside a situation he did not fully understand. Ida, Dolores said warmly, as though this were a pleasant surprise. We're just taking care of some quick paperwork. Of course, I said. I sat down in the armchair near the door and crossed my legs. Our attorney will be here by 9:30. We can take care of everything then. The temperature in the room changed. It's very simple documents, Dolores said. It really won't take more than Dolores. I kept my voice completely even. My daughter is 24 hours out from her wedding. You are asking her to sign legal documents with a notary present at 7:45 in the morning before she's had breakfast. Our attorney will review everything at 9:30. If these documents are as straightforward as you say, that will be a very quick meeting and we can all go have a lovely brunch afterward. Silence. Todd looked at his mother. Then he looked at Becca. Then he looked at Becca. Then he looked at the floor. Todd, I said, not unkindly, is there anything in those documents you weren't expecting? He was quiet for a moment. Mom said it was standard. Has your own attorney reviewed them? Another pause. I'll take that as a no, I said. Then let's all wait together. Dolores tried twice more to redirect, once suggesting that I was being paranoid, once suggesting that Becca was old enough to make her own decisions. I agreed with her on both counts and did not move from the armchair. At 9:32, my attorney knocked on the door. She reviewed the documents in 45 minutes. What she found was not a simple family LLC. The paperwork, dressed up in ordinary-sounding language about estate planning and asset consolidation, contained a clause that would have folded Becca's inherited trust into a jointly held entity, effectively dissolving its status as separate property. In the event of divorce, it would have been treated as marital assets. There were also provisions that named Dolores as a co-trustee with approval rights over distributions above a certain amount. It was elegant, honestly. If I had been a different kind of mother, or if Becca had been a different kind of daughter, it might have worked. My attorney set the papers down on the desk and looked at Dolores in a way that required no words. Dolores left without signing anything. The notary left with her. Todd did not go with them. He sat on that bed for a long moment after the door closed, not speaking. Becca stood near the window. I stayed in my chair and let them have whatever time they needed. "I didn't know what was in them," he said finally. "She told me it was just paperwork. I should have read them." "Yes," I said, "you should have. I'm sorry." He was talking to Becca. "I'm so sorry." My daughter, who has her father's heart in every possible way, crossed the room and sat down next to him. She took his hand. I will not tell you what happened in their marriage in the years that followed, because that is her story to tell, not mine. I will say that Todd and Dolores have not been close since that morning, and that my daughter has never signed a document without reading it first, or without calling me first, which amounts to the same thing. What I will tell you is what I told Becca that afternoon when we finally got that brunch. Just the two of us at a little place on the Riverwalk with good eggs, Benedict, and terrible coffee, and the most beautiful view of the mountains I had ever seen. She asked me how long I had known. Suspected, I corrected, from the first dinner. Known, about 4 days after the call you made to me. "And you waited." "I got ready," I said. "There's a difference. Waiting is passive. I was not passive." She was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in her hands. "Why didn't you tell me about the lawsuit?" I had known she would ask. I had been thinking about the answer for weeks. "Because I know you," I said, "and I knew that if I gave you a reason to doubt him before I had something solid, you would have either ignored me or you would have blown everything up. Neither one of those was good for you, so I built the wall first, and I let them walk into it on their own." She looked at me for a long time across the table. "You could have told me more," she said. "I'm an adult." "You are," I said, "and you were right to say that. Next time I'll tell you more." I meant it. She deserved that honesty even when the truth is messy and uncertain. The lesson I take from all of it, not the one about trusts or property law or prenuptial agreements, though all of those matter and I would tell any young woman to have one, is simpler than that. It is this: the most important thing I did for my daughter was not the phone call to my attorney. It was the conversation I had with her 2 months before, in the car on the way home from that first dinner, when I said quietly, "Don't give information to people who haven't earned it yet. Let them show you who they are first." She listened. That mattered more than anything I did in that hotel room. My cat General is asleep on the chair across from me as I write this. My garden is overgrown in the places I haven't gotten to yet, and perfect in the ones I have. My daughter calls me every Sunday evening, regular as the tide. Sometimes she calls in the middle of the week, too, when something is on her mind, and we talk for a long time about things that don't resolve easily. I raised her to do exactly that, and I would do every bit of it again. There is a moment in that hotel room I keep coming back to. Not the part where Dolores walked out, not even the part where my attorney set those papers down on the desk. It's the smaller moment, the one right before I knocked on Becca's door, when I was standing alone in the hallway in the clothes I had thrown on in 90 seconds, and I thought, I built this wall 2 months ago. Today I'm just watching it hold. That is what preparation actually feels like. Not dramatic, not loud, just quiet, solid, already done. People hear this story and they want to talk about Dolores, about how she could do something like that, how a person calculates that way, how greed can walk into a hotel room at 7:45 in the morning with a notary and a smile. And I understand the impulse. But I spent 40 years in law, and what I've learned is that Dolores didn't succeed. Not because she wasn't clever, and she was, but because the consequences she didn't plan for had been put in place long before she ever walked through that door. She counted on my daughter being unprepared. She was wrong because I had made sure of it. That's cause and effect, plain and simple. You do not get to outmaneuver someone who has already seen your move. What I want to say to anyone watching this, especially the younger women, the ones who are in love and want to trust everything and everyone around them, is that being wise is not the same as being suspicious. I did not teach Becca to be afraid of Todd's family. I taught her to give information to people who had earned it, not just people who were standing nearby. That distinction sounds small. It is not small. It is the difference between that morning ending the way it did and ending some other way entirely. I also want to say something about what it cost me to hold back the lawsuit information, because I have thought about this more than anything else in the whole story. Becca was right. She deserved more from me earlier. I made a judgment call that protected her in the short term and kept her in the dark in a way that wasn't entirely fair. Strength is not the same as control. I had to learn that. Being the person in the room who knows the most does not mean everyone else needs to know less. She is an adult. She was capable of handling the truth with my guidance. That was a lesson I took seriously after that brunch by the river. The three things I watched working together that day: the right values, the right preparation, and the willingness to hold steady under pressure. Those are not qualities you're born with. Becca has her father's heart, open and generous, and she spent years with me watching how I moved through difficult rooms. You absorb what you're surrounded by. The moral backbone to say, I won't sign this without my attorney, that came from somewhere. The quiet intelligence to call me before doing anything else, she practiced that. And the steadiness to sit in that room while Dolores tried twice more to redirect without crying, without escalating, without running, that was hard won. I think about Dolores sometimes, not with bitterness, mostly with a kind of tired clarity. Whatever she was trying to protect or build or claim by walking into that room, she lost all of it. Not because someone punished her, but because what she was doing couldn't hold up to a single hour of scrutiny. That is always how it works. Eventually, the structure matters more than the surface. My daughter calls me every Sunday. We talk for a long time about things that don't resolve easily. That is, I think, the best outcome I could have asked for.